Hi, I'm Becca. I'm a writer here at LittleThings, and I am going to be showing you how to do some arm knitting today. So, first step is to find the end of your yarn. You want to use like a really thick gauge yarn like this that's really dense. Otherwise, if you use a thinner one, you can, but it will go a lot slower. So stretch out about 2 arm lengths of yarn. You're going to knead it later. Then make a slip knot and put it around whichever hand you're more comfortable using. All right, here is the first tricky part. Can you see? It's my hands. You're gonna hold the yarn between the fingers of your other hand in a V and loop the strand that's still connected to the skein around your thumb. So you've got this V with the thumb, and then take the hand with the loop around it, move it underneath the strand, and pull it over your hand. Now I'm going to do it again in case you didn't get that. I'm actually going to do it 8 more times. So you've got the V, you bring your hand underneath the strand, pull out your thumb, and then pull it tight. And repeat. It's just like casting on when you are knitting with needles, but a little bit more complicated.
But on the top right.
All right, and if you want to see the finished product, you can see it on the top right of the screen there. It's that yellow scarf. That's one I put together for you guys to check out last night. And you can see that it's like it turns into like a big, like pretty impressive scarf that'll keep you really cozy in these chilly spring months. So let me slow down a little bit to show you how the actual knitting is happening. So you hold the hand firmly in your working, or the yarn firmly in your working hand. Just pull it through the loop and tuck it over your opposite hand and pull tight, and then just rinse and repeat. That's the 3rd row. reach the end of my first skein of yarn, which means I have to knot another piece in. You can just weave these strands back into the finished product when you're done. All right, so if you're just joining us, we're arm knitting a scarf. We're using this really heavy yarn. It's just like a really, really thick 8-ounce yarn. This is like 15 yards, and we're gonna go through about 3 skeins of it. You can find this at any craft supply store like your Michael's, your Hobby Lobby, and it comes in all sorts of different materials. This one's an ordinary polyester, but you can also find like a really thick merino wool if you want to do that, and it creates this really dense, thick knit, which is what we're doing right now. So it's 8 ounces of yarn. run through it pretty quickly, so then you want to start with a new skein. And this is going to be about 3 when all is said and done. Please let us know in the comments if you have any questions about how the loops are being made, if you need me to go slower. So if you didn't see me cast on at the beginning, I'm going to be making another scarf, so stay tuned in and I'll show you how I cast on. But it's essentially just like casting on with ordinary knitting needles. You make a slip knot and then you put it over your hand and then you create the stitch by looping your hand through the yarn and pulling it tight. So it's just like casting on with ordinary needles, just with your hands instead. If I'm going to take that out right now, but I'm going to show you, I'm going to start over again when I do my second scarf, and you can take a look at it then also. So I'm winding down to the end of this skein, so I'm going to knot another piece on. It's usually going to take between 3 and 4 rolls of yarn or skeins of yarn to make a completed scarf. It depends how long you want it to be, how thick you want it to start out with. I cast on 8 stitches at the beginning, which is, it's not a ton, but it adds up very fast. As you can see, this is a pretty thick scarf. I probably could have even gone, 5 or 6 stitches. So this one, because it's so thick, it might take a little bit more yarn to get the length we want, but you can start with fewer stitches at the beginning. See, here's the end. If you start with fewer stitches at the beginning, you'll get a longer scarf at the end. I mentioned before that when you knot a scarf, or when you knot the yarn, you end up with these loose ends that are kind of just all over the place, but you can weave them back in at the end and they'll get hidden really nicely in the scarf. So it might look a little bit like you can't stop and pick this up later because it's stuck on your arm, but you totally can. What you need is like either like a chopstick or skewer, something long enough that you can just thread through the stitches and keep them in place. If you have a really large size knitting safety pin, you can use that too, and it will just grab around the stitches and hold them in place. As long as you have something like longer at your disposal that won't get disrupted, then you should be totally fine. You'll be able to set it aside, pick it up later, just thread the stitches back onto your arm again to start over. If you're just joining us, we are knitting a scarf using our arms instead of knitting needles. If you have any questions, please let us know in the comments. If you guys are curious to see what the finished product looks like, you can see it in the upper right of the screen. It's that yellow scarf on the top. That's the finished look of the scarf. It's really cozy. You can also turn this into an infinity scarf if you want when you get to the end. If you don't want a super long scarf, I would go till it's about 3 feet long, and then you can stitch the ends together. Again, using your hands, not needles. You can just weave the yarn back and forth to weave the two ends together, and then it will turn into a loop, and then you can just wrap that around your neck. 3 feet is a good length for that because it's really thick. So if you want to see, so this is what the scarf is looking like right now. There's the end. We've got a few loose bits here, you know. This is from tying in new bits of yarn to keep the length going, but we're just going to weave these right in at the end, so don't worry about those. But you can see that it's turning into this like really thick, nice warm scarf. if you want to see the finished product, you can also see in the top right corner, there's a yellow scarf. That's one that we put together ahead of time just for you guys to take a look at. And that is what the finished product will look like after you've used about 3 skeins of yarn. So I'm actually going to use 4 because I started with a slightly thicker cast on, a few more stitches at the beginning. So I want to make sure we get the length we want, so I'm using 4 balls of yarn. This is my last one. So the knitting process itself is really easy. You just pull up the loop in your working hand, pull your yarn through, and then stick your other hand through and pull tight. So you end up with kind of like a slip knot. It's just like knitting an ordinary stitch with needles. If you guys didn't catch the beginning of me making the scarf, I'm going to be making another one after this so you can see how I cast on at the beginning to get started. You could also really easily turn this into a blanket if you wanted to. So if you wanted to turn it into a blanket, again, you'd need this really heavyweight yarn, and you'd have to cast on, 2 or 3 times the stitches. So it's really just a matter of how long your arms are. But if you cast on, let's see, about 15 stitches at the beginning, and you're using a yarn that's really heavy like this, you should be able to create a lap blanket pretty easily. If you want a really big throw blanket, again, you'll be limited by the length of your arms, but you could cast on 20 stitches or so and get a bigger spread. But again, it would make a really nice cozy blanket. So this is a really speedy project. If you have a birthday tomorrow, you can make this today and it'll be ready to go. So a scarf typically takes maybe 30 minutes, maybe 20. It kind of depends how fast you're moving. A blanket would take probably an hour, but I've done all of this in the past few minutes that I've been on with you guys. So it's a pretty speedy process, especially once you get a little practice. So again, you could produce a scarf for tomorrow for a birthday if you needed to. And yarn like this that's really thick and heavy, it comes in a huge range of styles. Almost any craft store will sell it. You can get something like this at Michael's or at Hobby Lobby or whatever your local craft store is. You can also get a merino or a wool version. If you want to make something a little bit denser, this is ordinary polyester yarn. It's really nice and soft, really warm. Okay, so now we've reached the end of our yarn, and it's time to cast off. Here's how that's going to work. It's just, again, like you would with ordinary knitting needles. Knit a stitch, knit a second stitch, pull the first stitch over the end of your hand and off of the needle, and repeat. So knit a stitch, pull the last stitch off over your hand, painted myself into a corner a tiny bit because I ran out of yarn. I want to watch out for that, so I'm going to grab another spare skein just to finish it off. The nice thing about using yarn this thick is you don't have to worry about putting a stitch down for a minute. It's unlikely to pull out and ruin the project. Might make it a little tougher to cast off. Okay, when you reach the very last loop in your scarf, it's still around your hand, just take your loose end of yarn and pull it straight through. And pull it tight. Okay, that's the end. And if you want to weave it together at the other end, like we talked about earlier, you can do that. Fold it in half. Okay, here's our scarf. And we do have a couple of finishing bits and pieces here. If you have loose ends like I do from using more than one skein of yarn, you can just weave them in. It's so nice and thick that you aren't even going to see where the yarn is hidden. So that's like a really nice, easy project. You can also trim off any other ends that you don't want to weave in. So like your yarn that you started with at the beginning, right there, you can trim or weave back in. I'm going to weave it back in. here's our very long piece for the end, which we can just chop and then weave a little bit back into the edges here. And if you want to, again, if you want to sew it into an infinity scarf, that's just a matter of using a little bit of extra yarn and stitching the two ends of the scarf together. Again, no needles required. You can just use your hands. All right, and that's our scarf. I'm going to be doing a second one, so if you missed any steps, you can watch the next scarf in action. So if you are just joining us, we're going to be knitting a scarf using just our arms. We're using this very heavy weight yarn. It's 8 ounces of yarn, and it's from Loops and Threads, and you can get yarn of this weight and quality at just about any local craft store. You can get it at Michael's or Hobby Lobby, or anywhere else you might shop for yarn. And so the idea is that we're making a scarf, and our arms are the knitting needles. So first things first, you're going to pull out about 2 arm lengths of yarn, and that's going to be your tail, basically, just so you have enough to work with. Then make a slip knot. A slip knot in the yarn and pull it over. I like to use my right hand because I'm right hand dominant. It might be different for you, and you're going to work with both hands, so it doesn't really matter. So once you get the slip knot around your wrist, you pull tight with your 2 strands of yarn. You get your tail on one side and the working yarn that goes into the ball on the other. You're going to be pulling from the tail, so you want to make sure you have a lot of extra room on that. And I'm going to cast on, I think, 6 stitches, or 5 actually, just to make it a little bit narrower. Our last scarf was around 8 stitches wide. So to cast on, loop your thumb through the tail string and dip your hand underneath the strand and then just pull it tight. It's a lot like casting on with knitting needles, just with your hands instead. And then repeat those steps. So pull it tight in a V, have your thumb looped around the tail strand, and then dip your other hand underneath and pull tight. And I'm going to repeat that step 3 more times in case you didn't see it, so keep an eye on your screen. There you have it. Those are my stitches. And I still have a little extra tail left. You can just leave that loose. And then, just gonna get a little slack. Then you'll start knitting by grabbing the loop in your working hand, in my case my right hand, pulling it through the loop on your hand and out so it's completely off of your hands, and then put it on your opposite wrist and pull tight. And then just keep repeating that step. So you pull your working thread, your working yarn through the loop, up, and then over your opposite wrist. And you're going to be seeing me do that a lot, so if you didn't get it the first time, I'm happy to slow it down and explain it for you again. Just let us know in the comments. And I, by the way, am Becca Endicott. I'm a writer here at LittleThings. I forgot to mention that. Okay, so that's our first row done. And if you have any questions at all about what I'm doing, let me know and I'm happy to answer them. Also, if you want to see what the finished product looks like, you can see it in the top right of your screen. It's that beautiful yellow scarf we put together ahead of time for you guys, and it's a really nice, thick, cozy scarf. That's perfect for this weird transitional weather of March. Even if you don't have really thick weight yarn like this at home and you don't want to buy anything new, you can also, if you're organized, double up a ton of ordinary yarn. So if you get a thick enough kind of rope of ordinary yarn, again, you have to be really organized to make sure you don't get tangled up, but you can totally use ordinary yarn to do this project. You just have to keep doubling and doubling and doubling it. But it's much easier to just go to a craft store and pick up just a really, like, the thickest weight yarn you can find. That's ideal. It makes a really cozy, dense knit. And you can make this into a scarf, or you can go wider and do a throw blanket for, for sitting on the couch, or even a bigger blanket for your bed. Now, if you didn't catch me casting on at the beginning, it's just like casting on with ordinary knitting needles, but with using your arms instead. And when the video is over, you can go back and check out how I cast on, but just the brief tutorial here. You make a slip knot, and then you make a V with the yarn, and you loop one strand over your wrist, and then just rinse and repeat until you have as many stitches as you want. But again, if you didn't see me cast on at the beginning, once the video is over, you can go back and watch that. This is a great craft if you find it difficult to manage knitting needles, like they're just a little bit too fussy, or it's great to do with kids. If you want to do a project like where you show, if you're a big knitter and you have a daughter or granddaughter who wants to learn, this is a good way to learn the fundamentals. It's also really good if you have sore hands, if you have an injury or something, because it's really easy on your hands and it doesn't require all the fine motion of using knitting needles. Just really using your arms. And you don't have to shake your wrists as much as I do. That's just how I tighten the yarn, but you can pull it tight instead. So we are on for 15 more minutes, just showing you how to do knitting with your arms. And if you have any questions, please let me know. I'm here to answer them. I mentioned earlier that you can make a blanket if you want. That's totally doable. What you need basically is to just figure out how much space, how many stitches you can fit on your arm. So I've got about 6 on my wrists right now, so they take up a lot of space. But if you make them loose enough and you stretch up your arm, you can definitely make enough to make a blanket. You probably want around 20 stitches to get that done. Let's see, and I am reaching the end of my first ball of yarn, so I'm gonna find my second and tie it in. So you just knot it in, and then if you have a little extra yarn, a few tails at the end, you can just weave them back into your knitting. Oops. And this video, as soon as we are done, this video will be available for replay, so you can watch it as many times as you like. You can even save it on Facebook by just hitting the save button on the top. And then you can reference it later if you want to. We also have an article on our website, which we can share later, that shows you how to do it in detail in another video. Okay, so here's what we've got so far. If you watched our earlier scarf, you can see this one's a little bit narrower, but still very, very cozy and a little bit easier to wrap around your neck for a cold, blustery March day. And you can use any yarn you like, but preferably, you can go to a craft store and just find whatever the heaviest weight they have in stock is, and they should have a lot of different colors, and you can do this in any color you like. But you should be able to find, just about the heaviest weight of yarn you can. There probably won't even be a weight marked on it. It will just say like super heavy. There won't be a number. if you guys have ever tried a project like this before and you have photos or tips or tricks, by all means, share them in the comments. We can always use more information. Our scarf is going to use about 3 balls of yarn when all is said and done. So this is going to be a scarf when it's done, and you can either wear it as a traditional scarf, or here's the end where we started. You can stitch the ends together when you're done to make an infinity scarf or a cowl. You can also make this into a blanket if you want to. It's really easy to adapt it that way to a slightly different craft. And if you want to find really heavy yarn like this, just stop by your local craft store like a Michael's or a Hobby Lobby to see what they have. Scarf like this is super cozy for chilly weather. If it's windy and blustery, I mean, officially it's spring, but we all know that that's not true for a little while yet. So this is perfect for those transitional weeks until it gets really warm out. Okay, we've reached the end of our second ball of yarn, so let me find another end. Okay, so you just stitch it, or you knot it rather, just like that. And you can weave in those loose tails when you're done. Getting a little slack there. And let us know if you have any more questions about how this is done. Once we get through this yarn, we'll be showing you how to cast off one last time. If you didn't catch how to cast on, you can see that in the video. Once we're done, you can watch the replay. This is a really, really good project for learning the fundamentals of knitting or teaching somebody else the fundamentals of knitting, because it's really simple once you get the hang of it. It's really mindless. It's the perfect thing to do if you're trying to teach maybe your granddaughter how to knit. You can hang out and chat, and you can both knit really easily like this. And you can adapt the number of balls of yarn you use to the project. For this, we're using 3 to 4, depending on how thick or long you want the scarf to be. For a narrower scarf, you could probably use 2, especially if it was for a child. But you want to make sure you get that length. You want at least 3 feet of length to make sure it wraps around, preferably probably closer to 4 or 5 feet of length, depending on your height and how thick you want it to be. So it's a good idea to buy at least 4 balls of yarn to do a scarf project, and then once you know how much that'll take, you can kind of gauge what you'd need for a bigger project like a blanket. We'd estimate probably 15 balls of yarn, but you might find it's a little bit different for you. And if you didn't see me cast on at the beginning and get started, you'll be able to see that as soon as the video is over. You can rewind this video and go back to where I show you how to cast on. Essentially, you just make a slip knot and then you cast on just like you're using ordinary needles. And you can see how I do that earlier in the video, and I demonstrated at a few points. Okay, so actually, go back a stitch. So I'm actually going to cast off now, just so you can see how that goes. So it's just like casting off with ordinary needles. Knit a stitch, knit a second stitch, and pull the first over the second off your hand. When you get to the very end, you have one stitch left, and you have your loose yarn. Just pull it right through the loop and pull tight. And that is that. You are all done, and you can weave in the end if you want, or you can trim it off. That's totally up to you. But you'll have this beautiful, warm, cozy scarf to wear. Let's see. So let's measure that for you. So our scarf, that we just pulled together in the past like 25 minutes or so, is, let's see, 50 inches just about. So you're going to wind up with, so you know, you can make it any length you want. This is going to be really warm and cozy for a chilly day. And if you also want to take a look at another scarf we did, we put together a yellow scarf. That's the finished product, and you can see what that looks like on a little mannequin model, just to get a sense of the style. So here's our finished scarf, and that's the back. You can see the stitch looks a little bit different, but it's really thick and warm and cozy. This is perfect for wrapping up.